Good to meet you all. My name is Tim Choi. I'm responsible for products here at Watchdogs. And the session here is to give you information, share with you information about the world of enterprise file sharing. How many were at Jack's session this morning? So one of the things that he talked about was this world of enterprise file sharing, in particular tying to mobile devices, right? This T drive and making that available on iPads and iPhones and Android devices and such. And also this need to be able to share information outside. Jack sort of alluded to his book that he wrote, and in fact he actually used our solution to actually share drafts of his new book that he wrote with others. And the reason why people do so is around our security. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is that part, but along the way I'll give a demonstration of other aspects of considerations that you like to have with regards to enterprise file sharing. So in the spirit of enterprise file sharing, I'm going to present directly from my iPad. So here I have my Watchdogs app here. And like I said, safety, self-actualization, hierarchy of needs. A little bit about who we are. We are as you can probably know, enterprise file sharing and mobile productivity for the enterprise. We've been around since 2008. And we serve a wide range of enterprise organizations, as you can see here. A lot of them typically in regulated industries. Use cases we typically deal with are having to do with files that need to be made available on mobile devices or shared with parties outside of the company that are sensitive information, intellectual property, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so those are my only two slides with regards to who we are. I'm going to move on from there. The rest of the stuff is going to be about the world. A couple of stats. So the first number is 13. We have a partner by the name of Palo Alto Networks, and they did a survey in all of their enterprise customers, and they did analysis and found that on average there are about 13 file sync and share products that are within a company. I heard a very funny quote from a friend of mine who is a security architect, and he posted on LinkedIn. He said, "I heard someone said, 'Cool, that sounds like a really cool service. Is it for free?' It means that someone's leaking information outside of your company right now." Right? 76% of traffic is sent to Dropbox, on average of about 2 gigabytes per month on average. Other stats are interesting, 41%. So 41% of CEOs use only their iPad to do work. And this is sort of the growth of the iPad prevalence or tablet prevalence within the enterprise organization. And then 76%, this is a survey that Good actually ran, of enterprises that support bring your own device. So clearly, we now live in a world where the connected enterprise, the file sharing enterprise, the enterprise where people not only use the traditional company issued laptops, but also iPads and in particular personal computing devices. Do any of these stats sort of resonate with you guys? Do you guys see sort of a similar trend in your world? Yeah. And the reason why probably you're here is another stat. 50% of business processes run within files, right? Either product design, supply chain management, sales and marketing, research and development. Everything is run on PDFs, on Word documents, on PowerPoints. There's a lot of files that are being shared around and created and generated. And in particular, 80% we found out that of your company data is actually in unstructured data, right? So there's a lot of information that it resides within these sort of files that are being moved around within the company and outside the company. If you're interested in obviously more studies and stats, we recently ran a survey with Poneman. So Larry Poneman is a research analyst, much like Brian. But unlike Brian, who's very focused on consumerization of IT, Larry is very focused on information security. And what he did in the survey of about close to 800 IT professionals is that they have no visibility, 80% had no visibility of what was going on in their company around regulated data that's being moved into the cloud or files that are accessed on mobile devices, right? So this is a very, very interesting number here. I mean, it just points out to the fact that there needs to be more visibility, there needs to be more understanding of analysis of what's going on within the company. And tying back to that very first number of like the 13 file sharing and sync solution, stuff is going on. Now, if you're interested, you can get a copy of the report. These slides obviously will be available through the BriForum. I believe this session is being recorded, but come check out the survey. So, a slight shift. I'm a technologist at heart. I'm a product person at heart. But there's a gentleman that I really enjoy reading. By the name of Abraham Maslow. So how many of you guys heard of Maslow's? Okay, a few hands, cool. So in particular around organization behavior. Abraham Maslow was a psychologist, a professor at a couple of universities, including Brandeis and Columbia. And what he was most known for is this concept of hierarchy of needs. Right? This is sort of a notion that as we evolve, there are certain things that we need to have, and as we grow, we attain human happiness, right? And the concepts are been applied to like sociology, psychology, and even management theory. Like how do you motivate a team? What sort of things do you set into place for organizations to get better, work harder, increase productivity? So just a side note plug for Maslow's. I really recommend checking this out. This is for me personally is a really interesting read, in particular as I manage teams and how do you motivate teams. And so diving a little bit about more on what are the hierarchy of needs. So you can see the different tiers. So starting a very basic baseline of physiological. So the need for food, have water, have sleep. This is the most basic fundamental needs. And then once you attain that, then you move up to the next concern, which is around safety, security of resources, property, health, love and belonging, right? Having family, having friendship, and moving up to esteem. So once you sort of achieve that, respect by others, confidence, achievement, and then finally the end goal, as what Maslow says, is self-actualization. The concept of creativity, problem solving, being sort of having independent thought, right? So I know that this is probably a very different presentation from what you expected being in a tech conference, but again, there is relevance. I'll bring you back to this. But again, these are the various different tiers that Maslow sort of postulates and presents in terms of how human behavior acts or advances. So, okay. How does this all tie together with the topic that we're discussing today? Before we go on, there are two parties that I want you guys to keep in mind. There's on the left, order, and on the right, chaos. Right? So in my world, when I sort of view the different personas within organizations, there are chaos people and there's order people. Order people are obviously guys like Kermit and Bert, the eagle. Chaos people, the Cookie Monster. Right, constantly causing trouble, like cookies, bits of cookies flying all over the place. And who are they, right? How many of you guys have heard of like the shadow IT, the concept of shadow IT, or I see a couple hands. So shadow IT has sort of been used as a way to say end users have now gone online, sign up on some sort of free service, and start using IT technology tools that have not been endorsed by the organization, right? I'm not going to raise of hands how many have observed this within the company. I think that would be a too personal a question to ask. But on the left side is order. It's the organization, the enterprise, right? We're trying to control and protect our assets. We're trying to make sure that the company brand is not marred or not been negatively impacted. On the other side, the Cookie Monster, the chef. These guys are the end users that sort of just want to get their stuff done. They completely want to be independent, and they have their own tools that they've gone out and pulled down and downloaded and made available onto their mobile devices or even onto their corporate laptops, right? So I just wanted to sort of present to you guys the two worlds, and as I go through the needs of each of these people. So the hierarchy of needs with regards to the end user, I sort of, we've now sort of walked into, sort of my mind in terms of how I view, what products need to be developed and how they need to be developed. And they start off, on the first level, in particular around enterprise file sharing and sync. Physiological, the very baseline, being able to synchronize and get access to files, right? So very fundamental. I mean, I'm assuming everyone's used Dropbox, right? Or sort of Google Drive type technologies, right? So it's sort of very baseline. You sort of expect these to be available. What's interesting, I must say, though, is not only having access, but also having high fidelity access, right? So making sure that charts and graphs like these render out exactly the same as it was being sent, right? This is something that not a lot of people think about, but often at times, how many of you guys are iOS users? Okay, so you've opened PowerPoints on iOS devices, from mail, for example, and does it look perfect? Okay, there we go. And that's fundamental, right? The rendering engine is horrible. I fully agree with you. But the end users aren't going to say, iOS, you really suck. They're going to say, pick up the phone and call the guy who sent the file and say, hey, I can't read the file. What does this mean, right? So you create a frustrated experience for the end user, right? So when we say, sorry? Apple creates that frustration. They do need to upgrade their rendering engine. I fully agree with you. But what I would say is that on the baseline of physiological of sync and share, one consideration you should have is how well is the rendering done on those mobile devices? Is it clear? Is it crisp? Is it the same thing that was sent? Has the PowerPoint been malformed or broken, right? So I just wanted to sort of allude to that. Next step up, safety, right? Jack talked about this morning about the need for protecting of these files. You saw the Larry Poneman survey that was done. 76% of them were regulated industries. I won't take a survey, but I'm sure some of you are in regulated industries or even have business that deal with intellectual property. So the question is, how do I secure that information? How do I adhere to compliance? Love and belonging. Annotations, right? Being able to, be part of the collaboration work. Esteem, being able to share this file out to someone else. And then self-actualization, being able to create and edit, and then, being able to come up with new content. Take my iPad and be able to, come up with new things and work with others. Those are, from my perspective, the hierarchy of needs when it comes to the end user. So what I'm going to do next is actually drive deeper into each of these tiers. Specifically for this end user, and then share with you some of my thoughts on what are the necessities for each of these levels. So the first is physiological sync and access. So pretty straightforward, getting access to the most up-to-date information no matter where you are and what kind of device it may be. What we have observed in working with a lot of organizations is a couple of things. A PC sync folder, that experience of that Dropbox-like. I mean, what we've observed is users enjoy having that integrated desktop experience when they're working on their desktop. That, like I said, the Dropbox experience. How easy is it to drag and drop something inside? How integrated is it into right-click shares, for example, so being able to take a file or folder, right-click, and then present a context menu. Some of these things may be simple for us technologists, but for the end user perspective, these are actually quite important requirements that come out when we've gone through rollouts and deployments. The other one is actually quite fascinating, is how large can you support the files to be synced into the system, right? We deal with a lot of media companies, and they tend to be as large as 10 gigabyte files, right? They're not able to send it over email because they don't adhere to the email exchange policies of how large a file can be. Or maybe on the other side, the receiving end, maybe they block emails that are larger than maybe 10 megabytes. So the question of how large of a file can you support does come up. So those are a couple of points that I wanted to raise with regards to the PC sync folder. The mobile application container, as I shared directly from here, my PowerPoint, I'm using an app container right now. And again, the fidelity, how accurate is what was sent and what is received. Another one that's interesting that we found quite important for users was searching. I think the world of Google has sort of elevated the requirement of being able to find content easily. And how easy is it to find a keyword, in a 40-page document, maybe, for example, within the medical profession, maybe some sort of drug that they're looking for, being able to type that in and find that keyword within the document is an important aspect. So, understanding if the providers have full text index search, being able to search globally across all file systems, across the file system to find a keyword in the title or even the body is something that users do ask a lot about. So I just wanted to also bring that up. The third aspect is the web. Yes, we live in a world where we all, there are lots of laptops here around on the table here today. Obviously, my mobile device, my iPad, but also, being able to get access to the files, through a web interface. Largely because there are situations where, business users are traveling. They may be at a public kiosk. They need to get access to this information, but don't want to download the information onto the desktop, right? So this is also another sort of functional use case that comes up that users do ask about. And the question is, how does one view it through a web browser? How easy is it? And then on the same thread, what is the fidelity of the file? Again, going back to okay, am I seeing what was sent to me? And can I search, for content, for keywords within that file as I'm viewing it through the web browser? Right? So again, the fidelity, the searching, and obviously the supporting PCs, mobile app, and also the web viewer. I like to keep this interactive. Any questions along the way? No? Okay. The next is around security and compliance. So this is sort of the second level tier in the hierarchy of needs of file access, of file sharing. So protection, and why is it important? To make sure that whatever files I'm creating and I'm sharing, from a business workflow perspective, as a business owner's perspective, only the right people can have access to that file. Right? So I clearly have a business motivation to make sure that my intellectual property or my sensitive files don't get distributed all across the world. Right? So applying the file controls and access, who has access to the sensitive file obviously is an important aspect to discussion with end users. Jack actually talked about the watermark this morning. So when he distributed his drafts for his new book, he actually shared it using Watchdocs and applied a customized watermark on that file, so that if someone were to take a picture, leak it out, you'd be able to know and be able to trace who was actually the one doing so. Because the way the watermarks can work is you can actually customize it to the person viewing it. So you can say, if maybe Bob is viewing it, it'll be bob@gmail.com, date, time, IP address, etc. So watermarking provides an extra layer of defense and protection and traceability to prevent leaks, and that's how Jack was using it.
Much help when information already leaked, right?
True, but at least the visibility. There are many tiers, right? With defense, you always sort of have to have multiple layers that comes into play. The next is annotations. This is actually a really fun one. The number of the number of users that utilize this functionality is actually quite high. Being able to view the document, right? So now you view it, you have it available on your iOS device. And then being able to start writing notes directly onto it, right? So for example, being able to say, okay, I want to circle this part and be able to add a note, directly into, this document. And why is this obviously important is, hey, people want to work on that document as they're traveling on a plane, want to take notes and make suggestions of things to change. Couple considerations. How do you provide that annotation functionality? Jack talked about the open-in function and how open-in sort of creates a leak vector where information can be moved out of that mobile application into another application. and then now you've sort of lost control entirely. So what we've done instead at Watchdogs is to actually build the annotations functions into the mobile application itself. Right? So it's a fully contained environment that's completely secure. Right? The other question in consideration is, are these annotations available in the other interfaces? Right? So users annotate on mobile devices, but also want to be able to download it from their PC or be able to make it available on their sync client. So these are a couple of considerations to take in mind when evaluating how annotation functions are made available. The fourth level is share. So being able to easily take a piece of information, as in my case, I've viewed it, I've now made some annotations on it, but also now to share this information, right? So be able to share it, share these annotations with others, being able to share the original file with others, right? Being able to create sort of a easy Dropbox-like experience. So I can share it with other members of the research group or the other members of the marketing team, my notes and my feedback about this PowerPoint presentation that I'm sharing, right? Again, these are all very fundamental end-user functions, but it's quite fascinating that taking the functional capabilities, sort of opens up a lot of use cases that weren't available before, right? So I just wanted to touch on that one really briefly. And then lastly, for the end user's perspective, is the desire to edit and create, right? So being able to not only view information, create information, share information, but actually create new content or edit content that's made available to them. Right? So for example, being able to, in our case, for example, take a PowerPoint here and then be able to open this up in a application, an editor tool that's within the app, and then be able to start making changes to this PowerPoint presentation. Just bear with me one second. No matter where you are, right? So being able to sit on a plane and then be able to, make your modifications as necessary. Yeah. Exactly. So that offline functionality is very, very critical. For some reason, this one is taking a little longer.
That's not good user experience.
That would not be a good user experience. Clearly, I didn't give my offerings to the demo god today. But so in addition to making edits offline, also being able to run a virtualized session within the container itself. So right now, what we're doing here is actually connecting over the Wi-Fi to a PowerPoint presentation, opening our PowerPoint in full fidelity, and then streaming it to the application itself. So you're actually able to take.
Can you do it offline still?
This one does require online. So because this is server side, now we're virtualizing the session to display a full PowerPoint application directly to the mobile device. Right? So I can do, for example, maybe do something simple here.
Where is this hosted?
This is actually taking place. So the question is, where is this hosted? So this is taking place on the server. That it's either hosted by Watchdogs ourselves in our cloud, or we have customers that deploy the server within their on-premise, so they have full control over it.
That's purpose-built then? You aren't leveraging some sort of application virtualization platform that we already have?
No, but we've actually bundled the whole thing into the server itself. Mm-hmm. So as you can see, I can make changes directly into this PowerPoint. But to the gentleman to my left, yes, you do need to be online to be able to make these changes. The trade-off, the benefit here is you have a full PowerPoint session that you're now running within your tablet device. A couple interesting things that while I have your attention is that we have this thing called broadcast, and we can actually take this virtual session right now and actually broadcast it and share it with other people. So how some of my customers have utilized this function is actually create an editing session and then share it with multiple parties around in different parts of the world, and then others can see the editing session take place. And then in addition, there's also something called take control, where someone that I'm working with on this live session can actually take control of the session, make edits and changes, and then I can take control back. So sort of passing the ball passing control of this editing session between various parties. Right? So sort of enabling, again, this sort of the final tier of self-actualization and creation and edit, being able to do so not only with myself, but also do so with other parties around the world.
Is this URL always in this particular format with 7 digits and some sort of rogue ID?
Sorry, the question?
This part here just showed a session URL, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And the broadcast ID has like a 7 digits, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Is this how complex it is in the real world?
No, it can be more complex. It would depend on the session, obviously.
It's pretty straightforward. That's like we're having security here, and I would expect something was half a mile long.
I see what you mean. Yeah. So yeah, this is just one example.
It's a mix of digits and characters.
Any other questions before I proceed? No? So just exit out here. All right. So I just spent the last 20 minutes or so 10 minutes or so talking about the end user's hierarchy of needs. So I wanted to shift gears now to talk about the enterprise's hierarchy of needs. And the first, as you can see, that's equivalent, physiological safety all the way to self-actualization. You have things like deployment flexibility, control and tracking, integrations, branding, and then building and extend. I'll touch on each of these as we go through each slide. There was a gentleman that was asking about how a solution should be deployed. And it's a very fair question. How do you deploy an enterprise file sharing and sync solution for your company? Do you use a cloud service? Do you use a public cloud, a private cloud, or maybe an on-premise virtual appliance? These are considerations based on your operational needs and your security needs. Right? So, if, for example, cost and operational efficiency is important, obviously, a shared service will be great. However, if you have jurisdiction concerns around where your data resides, so for example, for some Swiss banks, for example, where they don't want information to reside in the United States, they want it to have full control. An on-premise on-premise appliance or software server would be probably the better approach. Right? So, considering both the security and operational will sort of lead you to which direction you pick. The controlling and tracking. First and foremost, the mobile application, right? And this is where the discussion with the various vendors on how they protect the mobile application is critical. Do they do encryption of those files within the container? How is it done? Is it just encrypting the container, or are you encrypting also the individual files within the container? Do you do jailbreak detection? Do you do, for example, the ability to do remote wiping? Being able to, from a server side, call to say, hey, this device has been lost. I want to be able to wipe the files for this user on that particular device. Are there open-in controls that are provided to ensure that files are only allowed to be opened into certain other third-party applications? Right. So having that discussion, I would, from my perspective, is pretty important in terms of how they build their app and how they secure the information within the app. Access control, authentication flexibility. How do you authenticate users? Is it Active Directory? Is it just username, password? Do they have SAML integrations? Do they support OAuth? Right? Being able to plug into single sign-on. What is their story there? We have to have the flexibility to adapt and plug into various types of authentication providers and identity providers. That obviously ties into access control. The next control is functional controls. Right? Can you, for example, apply things like no copy paste, no print, no edit, directly to each of those documents to ensure that no matter where the document is, either online, on mobile devices, on the PC, those functions are turned off, right? Being able to say that, hey, I want to distribute, for example, a medical record data to a specialist, but I don't want them to print it out because I want to make sure that the HIPAA information doesn't leak. Or maybe there's a product design information that they don't want you to copy out. So applying those security controls, have benefits there, and something to bring up when you're doing your functional analysis. And then the audits and logs and files. This is an interesting one. Who, when, what, and where. Who opened the file? When was it opened? What took place, and at what location? Right. So in regulated industries in particular, there's a lot of requirements around audit and logs, and to be able to demonstrate who has touched this piece of information. Asking providers to say, okay, can you provide such logs? Is something that I would suggest. Any questions on this slide? Feedback? No? What I term for love and belonging is integrations. And when we say integrations is how does it plug into your various enterprise infrastructure? So how do you deploy your solution, either from a PC perspective or a mobile application perspective? Being able to do GPO push, perhaps using MDM or MAM to deploy your applications and control the applications. How do you provision them? Through Active Directory, or maybe there's some other identity management solution that you have in place. Authentication, as I talked about, Active Directory, SAML, OAuth, etc. Logging, how do you plug into logging systems? Syslog, SEM. And then security, maybe the desire to plug into a hardware security module to do key management. So these are all the various touch points that we've observed when it comes to enterprise file sharing that needs to have interfaces into. Thoughts? Feedback? No? Yes?
Well, the integration with existing file systems, things like that.
Very good question. So the question is integration to existing file systems. And in fact, I'll actually get to that point at the very end. The next is esteem or brand. What we've also seen is the ability to brand your applications for enterprise file sharing is actually quite a powerful thing. It's very simple, it's very stupid, but the value that it brings is actually quite high.
It just reminds me, once application was written in-house many years ago, and it was some sort of capital cost approval application. And for the presentation, the CEO of the company was invited, and his two comments at the end of the presentation was that the wheel turns in Internet Explorer interface, and that wheel was sort of like a logo of the company, but it was turning like a rotating a little bit, and he was so happy he said twice, and the wheel turns, and hey, that's a green light, for spending more money on
Yeah, it's. I think brands are something that's emotional, right? And companies spend a lot of time building their brand. And in particular, when you're dealing with use cases, not only for employees, but distributing content outside of the company, maybe there's insurance, for example, independent agents. These are sort of agents that sell resellers of insurance products that are not part of the company. But having a branded icon on their mobile app sort of helps reinforce that, hey, let me go back to insurance such and such app to be able to get access to my data. So it's like I said, very simple, but there's something very emotional that has positive impact to the user experience. So, branding the app, like I said, branding the web interfaces, the desktop sync client, et cetera. These are functionalities that enterprises get a lot of value, and project managers get a lot of value to see success of their adoption. The gentleman in front was asking about extending file systems. And from my perspective, that's the final step, extending and building. So integrating into existing file systems like SharePoint, Windows file systems, CMIS-based systems, being able to take content that already exists, it's already there within your environment, that's already there within your company, and then being able to make that mobilized or make that externally available without having to migrate off or migrate or replicate to another environment, right? So, from there, a lot of money has been invested in your existing systems. Don't throw it away, right? This is from my perspective, people's, time, money, and reputation have been invested in it. But you want to externalize it, you want to mobilize it, right? But find a solution that is able to do so without having to give up on what you've done. The next thing is around building. So how do you build integrations into applications that are generating files, right? So maybe you have a application server that is generating monthly reports, and you want to make that automatically available to business partners outside or customers outside, or perhaps as internal employees. How do you make that available? What sort of interfaces, like web services interfaces, are available to be able to plug into those apps? And then thirdly, to build your own mobile application, right? I talked a little bit about branding in the previous slide, but maybe there's another project where you're looking to build mobile apps, something that's very customized to your business workflow. Are there SDKs that are available, iOS or Android SDKs, that you can take and then incorporate those file sharing functionalities, those rendering functionalities into this new app that you're building, and then layer on top of that your own brand and then roll it out to your employees or to your business partners, right? So like I said, so developing your own mobile application. Questions, thoughts about this particular comment here?
In your solution, if you do integration with existing file systems, can that still be SaaS-based?
Yes, it still can be SaaS-based. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So as an add-on to your question, the way our system works is that we would have access to the folder directory structure, but no files are replicated into the server, both on-prem and in the cloud, and then only on demand when the file is being requested do we pull it through. So there's no sort of replication or migration or copy over of all of your files in SharePoint into the Watchdog server, as an example.
And the native ACLs on the back end, would those apply as well in your solution?
Yeah. So replication. Yeah. So we would be able to do that. Mm-hmm. Cool. So typically, for example, it'll be things like Active Directory that we would integrate with. So we have Active Directory connectors that will be able to understand group membership, and the same group membership that you've assigned to, for example, a SharePoint library would be the same Active Directory group that we would assign to, that will be tied to the Watchdog system. Cool. So what we have seen our customers sort of use, having all the functional capabilities and the hierarchical tiers, is to then enable these sort of groups of use cases. So mobile content management, the secure Dropbox requirement, sharing externally with various parties, and then application integration, right? So from being able to get access to SharePoint files, SharePoint libraries on mobile devices, being able to share files from the desktop. Maybe it's a product design document, a PowerPoint slides, and then being able to share that externally, but control it and control not only who has access to it, but what can they do with it, like copy, paste, and print. And then being able to integrate into application servers, right? Being able to say, okay, I have my monthly report for my limited partners, and I want to make sure that these financial filings of financial information doesn't get leaked out. Being able to automatically do that on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly basis, through API calls. So with that, I actually finished my slides. I wanted to leave the rest of the time for questions and answers, a Q&A session. I sort of...
Licensing, how expensive is it actually? And I'm probably more asking about on-premises.
So you're asking about licensing? So the information is public. So the information is public. You can go on our website and actually find it. But essentially, it's a subscription-based model. We start off at $15 a user a month. Yep.
That's on site?
On site, yep. Yep. So we don't price, it's the same pricing.
Right? Per month or per year? Is that
Sorry?
per month or per year?
$15 a user a month.
A month. 15, 1.5.
1.5, yep. Yep. Starting. Depends on volume, obviously.
Just,
Yeah.
I was just telling my buddy here that I was quoting one video conferencing system, and after a few days of quoting, management said, yeah, you know what, we'll Skype for now. So typically when you come to them with some sort of quotes, they say, yeah, but Dropbox is free, So,
Well,
SkyDrive is free.
so I think it's important, and this is how what we've observed is that tying to specific business processes, right, and understanding, okay, for example, a medical profession, right, if a physician wants to share a file outside to a specialist outside the firm, you wouldn't be able to do that. If it's a engine design that you're looking to share to your outsourced manufacturer, you wouldn't be able to do that. Right. So the question is, what specific business process? And this is what I tell all of everyone I speak with. What is the file that you're looking to share or make available on mobile device? Right. Understanding that would then bring out what are the requirements around for the end user, right? For the end user, is it annotations? Is it editing? Is it syncing? How large are the files? Those functional components will come out, but you first have to start off with, okay, what kind of content is my organization dealing with right now? What sort of content is being created and needs to be distributed between colleagues and outside my company?
My question is kind of incomplete. How do you carry identity across platforms and access restrictions across platforms?
So the question is, how do I carry? So how do I enforce access? If I may paraphrase, how do I enforce access controls across all the various platforms? So be it on the web, mobile device, and on my PC, for example. So the identity that we key off, against is the email address, specifically for Watchdogs. And that's how we would, using that, we would then identify who you are, and then route you to the appropriate authentication provider to then, go walk, either username, password, Active Directory, maybe a single sign-on that you've implemented with our SAML connector. We key off from that starting point.
So an associated identity.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
But the authorization check is still done by the whatever identity.
Exactly. So, for example, we have a banking customer that we work with, and the way their executives, the CEOs, log into my app is using their RSA Secure ID token. So they open up their app, they type in their OTP, and then be able to then proceed. Right. So you tie the integrations together that way. No? Okay. Well, I thank you for your time today. I hope this was an informative session. I hope this was helpful to give you a sense of what the different tiers and requirements that you should consider when looking at enterprise file sharing solutions. I'll be up here. We also have a booth just outside, but I'd love to follow up if you have any other questions. Thank you for your time.